Bethany. I'm a designer with Copper Creek Patterns, and today I'm going to teach you how to make the Enchanted skirt. This is a beautiful skirt with an overlay, so it's a lining with a sheer overlay. We're going to talk about some of the materials that you can choose when making this, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to make it with. This pattern is really not hard construction. What makes it challenging to some is working with these types of materials, with slippery satins and silks to mesh and organza and lace and delicate fabrics that you can choose for your overlay. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks throughout this video of best practices and some good tips on how to work with these types of materials so you can successfully make this beautiful skirt. So the first thing that we need to talk about is the lining. So the lining skirt is shorter. It is meant to hit right around the knee, right above, right at. If you want to add some length to it so it's a little longer, you absolutely can. But it is meant to be shorter than the overlay skirt, okay? Now the lining I've chosen, this is lining material that I picked up at the store. It is shiny, kind of gives that, it's like a satin lining on one side, and then obviously it's matte on the other, so you can clearly see which is the right side. This is 1/2 of the lining skirt because I did cut it on the fold, and then the other half I have here, and that's the other half. There we go. So I have my two lining skirt pieces. I also have cut out my overlay pieces, and for this version I am sewing it with this mesh. It's like actually it's more like an organza with velvet polka dots. I wish you could feel how soft these little polka dots are. It is a little harder to tell right side from wrong side because they pretty much look the same on both sides. So it doesn't really matter on this material, but be sure with your material that you are paying attention to the right side and wrong side, especially for your overlay pieces, because you want to make sure it's all facing out the right way when we sew up this skirt. So this is actually going to be a midi length, whereas the lining is more of a knee length, and it's going to help give that wow factor to show that this outer layer is sheer and there's a peekaboo skirt, very modest peekaboo skirt underneath. Of course, if you wanted to shorten it, you absolutely can. All right, so let's talk about materials. Obviously we want something that's not see-through as our lining, but for our overlay we do want something that has that sheerness to it, that see-through feel. And there's different types that you can choose. As I mentioned, I've got an organza here, but it's pretty see-through, as you can see. But you can use a mesh. You could use a lace. You could use all sorts of different types of material that have kind of that see-through peekaboo feel. Obviously, the more see-through it is, the more of a wow factor you'll get between the skirt layers. And it's also really fun to get something that has maybe some embellishment, like these little velvet polka dots. They're pretty mild, but there are some with sequins, embroidery, oh my goodness, there's lots of different types to choose from. But just be sure that if you get something that has some sort of beading or sequin, that you do take some time, that as you start piecing this together and you're lining up your seams to sew, that you're paying attention to where those bulky embellishments are, because you don't want to sew over those. So if there's a pearl bead or some sort of beading or really bulky sequins, you might want to snip that out. You definitely want to take beads off that are going to be in your path of sewing so that you don't damage your machine, break a needle, or mess up your beautiful fabric. So just keep that in mind when choosing your material, that you might have to be a little on the safe side when you're sewing yours up if it's got any of that kind of embellishment on it. So I have a couple other examples of material that I want to show you. So this skirt that I've already sewn up is with an organza, but it's just a printed organza, and you can see that it is still sheer, but because it has a print, it's not quite as sheer as the black with the polka dots. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And then I have a couple other fabrics that I haven't sewn up yet that I just pulled off my fabric wall over here, and I thought I would show you these just because they could be a fun option just to spark some inspiration, because this is one of those patterns where really I feel like your fabric choice can just elevate the finished look of it. So I'm going to show you one layer of this if I can here. So this truly is a mesh. It feels like kind of like pantyhose, but it's embroidered and It is so beautiful, and this could be a really fun kind of idea if you wanted to get something that had embroidery on mesh. This one is a polka dot, so clearly I have a thing for polka dots, but this one is actually a mesh polka dot, and so it's even more sheer than the other one, and I feel like it's got these little velvet polka dots too, but I feel like this one would be a really fun option as well, to do like a kind of a matching nude lining underneath. But again, totally up to you. Have some fun with it. I also think it would be fun to like mix and match so that the lining had a pop of color under something, and see that through. So I'm telling you, the world is your oyster. Have fun picking out fabrics. All right, the last thing that you are gonna need for this is elastic. I call this elastic banding because it is pretty wide. You can get different kinds. There's glittered ones and colored ones and all sorts of fun ones. You can usually buy them by the yard at a fabric store. This one that I'm using today is 1 3/4 inch wide. You can go up to 2 inches wide. I wouldn't really go any smaller than this because we want a nice, really beautiful band all the way across the top of our skirt. It's just going to give it like a nice little frame around the waist. It's also going to sit right at the high waist area. So when you lean over from side to side, wherever your waist is bending or kind of folding right there, that is that waist. So when we say measure your natural waist, that is what we're talking about. And so there's not a pattern piece for this, but we're going to tell you where to measure and then what measurement to subtract from that to be able to get the right length of your elastic. So be sure you have some elastic on hand. You're going to need as much as like your waist measurement right around your natural waist. All right, let's get started sewing and putting all of this together. So the first thing we're going to do is sew our lining skirt together. We're going to sew this side seams together. So I've got my first piece right side up. I know it's the right side because it's the shiny side of my material. Now you can see mine's got some wrinkles here, and that's okay for right now. If you wanted to go ahead and steam it first, you can, or you can steam it after. If you have a lot of wrinkles, you probably would want to steam before you cut it, or before you start sewing it together. So what I'm going to do now is lay my second lining skirt on top of the other one, right sides together. So now I have my not shiny side facing up because my two shiny sides are right sides together. And I'm going to use clips to clip down both sides of the side seams. The side seams are the long straight seams, the only two straight seams on the skirt on either side of the waist curve here. And I do recommend using clips for this. Clips are preferred when working with these types of materials like satins and silks, as well as with organzas, mesh. Those tend to be not forgiving when you use pins because they'll leave holes and you'll still see the holes. Also, they can cause snags like in the mesh and organza as well, and they're just not going to hold as securely with this very slippery material. So I do recommend using clips if you have them on hand to be able to clip this material together, and then we're going to head over and start sewing it up. Another helpful tip when working with this type of slippery and delicate material is to use a lot of clips. The more clips you have, the more control you'll have over the material as you're sewing it together. When sewing up this skirt, you have a couple of ways that you can sew it up. I'm going to be featuring a lot of it on the serger, but I'm also going to be using it on the sewing machine as well behind me. So you can choose to sew up this entire skirt on a sewing machine if you like. I'm going to tell you how you can do so, and then our tutorial that comes with the pattern also gives you those options and details as well. But for my sake, I actually personally like to use my serger, especially when working with these types of materials that can fray, because it really does help seal and close in that seam so it doesn't continue to fray. You can choose to sew it on a machine first and then come back and finish your seam allowance with a serger as well. That's a great option, but it's totally up to you. And so what I'm going to do is I've already got my serger threaded for a 4-thread overlock stitch, and using black matching thread, I'm going to sew up both of these side seams, and then we'll meet back over at the table. Okay, so we have two skirts sewn together. They're both inside out. So what we're going to do is turn them right side out so that our seams are on the inside. We're going to do the same for the lining. And we're going to place our lining inside of our overlay skirt. So I kind of like to lay this out since we're working with so much material so that the side seams are out to the side. Then we're gonna slide this in, and I'm gonna take the side seams of my lining skirt and line them up with the side seams of my overlay skirt, and I'm going to clip them together at the side seams. And then once I have these two, I like to give it a little shake and shimmy. So now that my lining skirt is kind of evenly dispersed inside my overlay, I can make sure it's not like twisted or anything. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to pin my lining to my overlay all the way around the waist. You're going to need quite a few clips clipping these two pieces together. All right, so I have the entire skirt lining and overlay clipped together all the way around the waist. All right, so I have clipped together my entire waist area, the lining to the overlay. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go use my serger to sew this together. But if you're gonna do this on a sewing machine, you absolutely can. Just sew a nice stitch all the way around to keep them secured together, about a 5/8 inch seam allowance. One tip that I want to pause and give you some information on is when you're sewing with this kind of material, especially a lot of material, it's really important that you pause every so often, adjust your material so it's not getting twisted, so it's not pulling either against your seam, falling off your table. You want your material to be supported but not twisted. You want your to be able to evenly feed your material into the machine. You also want to keep a hand here to make sure that the material's not coming up underneath and gonna get sewn, like another part of the skirt gonna get sewn into this. So we don't want that to happen, especially when we're sewing layers like this. So I like to keep a hand here to make sure I don't feel anything but 2 layers of fabric here. And that way I'm sure to not sew anything I shouldn't be sewing. Let's keep going. The next thing we're going to do is sew 2 basting stitches. A basting stitch is a lengthened straight stitch, and we're going to sew one just below where I serged it, or where you sew that your sewing stitch line, and then one more right below that. So they're going to be about 1/4 inch apart, right underneath where we sewed them together. And we're going to do that all the way around the entire waist. So for this, as I mentioned, it's a basting stitch. So I'm going to select my straight stitch. I'm going to hit and lengthen my straight stitch as far as my machine will go, which is 5 millimeters. Your machine may only go to 4, and that is completely fine, but set your straight stitch to as long as it will go. And we're going to sew 2 rows of those stitches all the way around the skirt waist. Another important thing to note is we do not back stitch at the beginning or the end of our basting stitches. We do not want to secure them because we are going to be pulling them. Now that I've sewn 1 basting stitch just below my serge line, I'm going to go in and do another one just below that. You want to make sure that your stitches never cross, and we're going to do this one more time. So the next thing that we need to do is measure out how much of the elastic banding that we need to fit around our waist. We need to figure out what this needs to be and make our band before we gather our skirt, so we know how much to gather our skirt to fit our band. To figure out how much elastic you need to take a tape measure, and you need to measure around the natural part of your waist. The skirt is meant to hit right at the high waist or the natural part of your waist. So if you're not sure exactly where that is, you can just stand up and lean to one side, and where that kind of bend is in your waist, that is your natural waist. And you can do the same to the other side and find it, and here is my natural waist. I'm going to take my tape measure, measure around. Once I have my measurement, I'm then going to take my elastic banding and I'm going to take 1.5 to 2 inches off of that measurement. So let's say your measurement for easy math purposes is 30. You can take 2 inches off and cut 28 inches, or you can take 1.5 inch off and cut 28.5 inch length elastic. The reason I kind of say 1.5 to 2 inches is a couple of reasons. Not everybody's elastic stretches as much as the next person's, so that could be part of why you might not want to take as much off. The other part is some people like their stuff really fitted here and some don't, and so this will kind of give you some wiggle room to make sure it's not too tight, but it's snug enough to stay up while you're wearing it. So I'm going to cut mine down, and then we're going to sew our band together. Okay, so I've got my piece of elastic banding cut down. Now mine has a right side and a wrong side because it's got this like groove on the front. I don't know if you can see that. It's a little different than the back. If yours is the same on both sides, it's fine. You can just fold it in half. Mine is different, so I'm going to fold it right sides together and clip the two short raw ends together. Now I'm going to go over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew a 3/8 inch seam allowance zigzag stitch across here, and I'm just going to line up my presser foot with the right edge of this material and just zigzag across. I'm going to go back and forth multiple times because this is going to get a lot of stretch. We definitely want to use a zigzag stitch because that's a stretch stitch and will allow our elastic to still stretch because we're going to need it to. But we're going to create this seam here, and then we're going to tack down the seam allowance and make it nice and smooth before we attach it to our skirt. Alright, so I have my elastic sewn together, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open it up and I'm going to fold these seam allowances down. It's not a huge seam allowance, but that's okay. We're going to go back to the machine and we're just going to top stitch it down on both sides of the seam allowance. So one here and one here. We're going to just straight stitch those down so it creates a nice slim seam across here, and this is going to create the back seam on our skirt. This may be a little hard to see on camera because it is black fabric, but I have my tails here, and since I was sewing on the top here so I could see my stitches really well, then this side is actually my bobbin thread, and you want to pull your bobbin thread. So I'm going to separate them, and you want to pull your bobbin thread. So I've got two, one at the beginning, one at the end. So I'm just going to pull these, and you just want to carefully hold both threads and kind of pull and scrunch the material as you go, and just kind of pause and like move the gathers down across the front of the skirt. And we're just going to gather and gather and gather and gather and gather. Okay, we're going to gather until it is the same distance around the waist as our elastic that we made. So this is one of those where you're just going to keep gathering and then take your elastic and hold it up and make sure, like, is it the same? Is it going to fit inside that elastic? Now that I've done some across this side, I'm going to come over here and grab these going this way, and I'm going to do some going around the back side. So you can gather in both directions to fill the skirt. Okay, so I have my elastic here, and this is my seam. Now you can choose to put this seam aligned with one of the side seams if you want, because at least on mine from the front or from the right side of it, you don't really see it at all. Okay, you'd really have to be looking for it. I put it in the center between the two side seams, and I just call this side the back of the skirt. It doesn't matter which side you do that on because the skirt's the same on the front and the back. So you can choose whichever side you want to make the back, and then for me, this kind of identifies this is the back of the skirt. Again, it's personal preference. This is what I like to do. You can hide it in the side seam and your skirt can be reversible. It doesn't matter. The next thing you're going to do is we want the elastic to cover our gathers like this, okay? Because we're going to sew it down across here, okay? It's going to be resting at the top of the skirt. The finished version will look like this. Here's that back seam, and it'll look like this. So it just looks like it's sitting right on top, and then you'll see our gathers on the inside. And so that's what we're going for. Sometimes it helps to see what the end result is before we start doing it. So what I like to do is divide my elastic band in half and put my seam wherever you want, either here at this end or in the middle, and have, divide in half side to side. And then I'm going to take the side opposite of where my gathers are. So these are my gathering tails. So the side of my skirt, the other side seam is here, and I'm going to pin my elastic to the skirt here at this side seam, okay? And then I'm going to come to the other side, and I'm going to do the same where my gathers are. And I'm going to, before I pin it, I'm going to kind of hold it all together and stretch the skirt because I've gathered it. And I'm going to stretch that so that the skirt waist area is the same width without stretching the elastic as the elastic, okay? Because I want to make sure that I'm not making my skirt waist here too tight with the gathers, okay? It's easy to over gather, and so once you've gathered your material and you put your band up next to it like this, then you can kind of loosen those gathers, and then after I've loosened them, I will pin this seam here, this side. So I've only got these 2 points pinned. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up and kind of look at where my gathers are, and it's really not gathered very much over here where I started my gathers, so I'm going to kind of evenly spread these out and slide them around so that I have more gathers over here. You want your gathers to be even all the way around your skirt, okay? And so just take some time to do that, because if you don't, it will show on your finished skirt if it's not gathered evenly, and we don't want that to happen. Okay, so now that I've done that, now when you go to pin this, you'll see that I'm not pinning this all the way to the top of the elastic. So my elastic was 1 inch and 3/4, so 1 3/4 inch, and I bring my skirt gathers up 1 inch. And the easiest way to know that I've gotten it up 1 inch is to know that this part from the top of here to this edge should be 3/4 of an inch, and it is. And so as I pin around, you want to make sure that it's even, that you're pinning it even all the way. Because if you don't pin this waist evenly all the way, then the skirt hem will not be even, it'll be uneven. So, and every so often, I'm just going to take my ruler, and see that one's up way too high, and so is that one. See how they've gotten up too high? And you see how I've gone whoop, way up high? So I need to unpin these and pull that down so that my skirt is even. All right, that is so much better. We're just going to keep working our way around. And once we get it pinned all the way around, I'll meet you over at the sewing machine so we can attach our waistband. So for this part, we're going to set our machine to a zigzag stitch because we're sewing through this thick elastic plus the gathered materials. I have lengthened my zigzag and widened it to make it easier to go over. It'll still give me all the support I need to attach this elastic, but just make it easier to sew. I am lining my presser foot up with the left side of the elastic here. So that's what I'm using as my guide to make sure that I am catching, you want to sew this part of the elastic, not up here because the gathers aren't up here, they're down here, and we want to sew on this side. You do want to make sure that you're back stitching to secure your stitches as we work our way around. Be sure to pause and adjust. You don't want to pull on your gathers or anything. You want to keep them laying nice and flat, and you definitely want to take out your pins before you sew over them so as to not damage your machine or break a needle. The next thing that you're going to want to do is, you see how I can't really stretch my waist of my skirt? It's because I still have those basting stitches in place, and when you zigzag this elastic to the skirt, it kind of tacks down some of those basting stitches. So what you're going to have to do is go through and remove your basting stitches. It is tedious, it does take a little bit of time, but once you do, you'll be able to stretch the waist of your skirt with the elastic, just like on this skirt here. I can completely stretch it, and my gathers and my skirt stretch with my elastic. So just remove those basting stitches, and then you'll be able to have the stretch in your waist as you need. The last thing we're going to do is hem up our skirts, and then we are all done. There are 3 different ways that you can hem up your skirts, and you can do each layer a little differently if you like. My preferred method is called a 3-thread rolled edge hem. It creates this beautiful border all the way around the edge, and it's going to prevent my material from fraying. You can also do this on your lining as well. This is probably the fastest and easiest method for hemming this type of material on these skirts. This is done on a serger. So if you don't have a serger, then you can do this on a sewing machine, and there's 2 different ways. Or one hem that you could do is you could do what's called a double folded hem, where you fold it and then fold it again and then stitch it down. You want to double fold so that it doesn't fray. If you just folded it once and stitched it down, it still could fray. So you want to do a double fold. The challenging part of doing that with this type of material is the fact that even if you do press it, it doesn't really stay where it should. So my little trick for that is called seam tape. This is actually a water-soluble seam tape. And what that means is when I put this down across here, I'll just do a small section to show you. All right, and then I'm going to remove the paper backing, and so now I have this little sticky tape right here. It's not super sticky, but it's sticky enough, and this is water soluble. So what that means is after I hem this up and I wash my skirt, this will dissolve away and it won't be there anymore. But it's great for a temporary hold to your material. So what it does is I can fold this up along this hem right here, and see how it neatly folds that? Super easy, nice and crisp. And then all I have to do is fold it again, and I could take my clips and clip that along there, and then I can go around and top stitch this, and that would be a double folded hem. It's way easier with seam tape, so get a little roll of this and use it. And then for this type of material, do a fray test. Some of these, like this, doesn't fray. This one is not fraying at all. You could just cut it and leave it just like that. This one, while it's also an organza, this one wanted to fray a little bit. So I did do the rolled edge, and plus I love kind of like the flowy lettuce hem that it gives to it. But this one you could leave alone. I will probably do a rolled edge on this just because I love how that looks. And then I will do this double folded. The third option for hemming that you can do is called a rolled hem foot. Let me go grab one and I'll show you what it looks like. All right, a third option for hemming your skirts is called a rolled hem foot, which looks like this. And it's got this little curve here, and this, when attached to your machine, feeds the fabric in and under the needle, and when it feeds in, it curves the fabric up and over and stitches it down, or folds it down so it can be stitched over. So it's kind of creating that fold and stitching at the same time. It's very handy, but this foot does take a little practice. Definitely take some of your scrap material and practice it a few times until you get the hang of it, and make sure you like the look of that before you do it on your skirt. But for me, I am going to go back over to my serger and I'm going to do this rolled edge to finish off my skirt, and then I'll be done with hemming. Alright, we have finished our beautiful enchanted skirt. I hope you enjoyed this pattern. If you do make it, please let us know and tag us in your photos. And until next time, happy sewing.